Hi there, welcome to the lab. Today we're going to be having a look at this battery charger. It's from a company called Opus. It's the BT-C3100 version 2.2, and this can handle, according to the instructions here, NiCad, nickel metal hydride, and lithium ion rechargeable batteries in a wide variety of cells sizes. And we'll be putting it through its paces, checking out its features. I'd like to just ask that if you found this video to be helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Questions and comments are always welcome and appreciated. It helps me figure out where to focus my activity. Now let's get into the box. Pretty straightforward here. There's a printed sheet with some instructions. So a couple of pages, so a lot of instructions here. So there's a lot to read. This charger can do a lot of things, including testing cells. So that's the charger itself, and of course not very interesting without power. So we'll power that up in a minute. And then there's a power brick here, and it's designed to put out 12 volts up to 3 amps. So that may have some limiting effect on just how quickly we can charge some of the cells. We'll look into that later. All right, now let's have a look at the unit. Historically, there were a few versions of this charger on the market. A BT-C3100 version 2.1, version 2.2, which is what this is, and a BT-C3400. The 3100 2.1 was the initial model. Apparently there were issues with the fan noise up there. The 3400 was produced for a specific reseller and had a few minor firmware changes as shown on the screen, as well as an improved, quieter fan. Opus then incorporated the changes from the 3400 into its version and relabeled it as the 2.2. What that means is the 3100 2.2 and 3400 are identical, and they're both the latest version. I have the charger here and a whole bunch of batteries that we can use in order to explore the operation. Now, the things that we are going to want to see are on the display here. I'm going to zoom in on the display so that we can focus on what's happening with the display and the controls. We don't really need to see too much about the battery slots themselves, other than to note that these are spring-loaded and they generally seem to make pretty good contact with the cells when you put them in. The unit is currently powered off. You can see the display is not on. It's obvious. Now notice in this section when I turn the display on, that 2.2 that appeared momentarily indicates that this is firmware version 2.2. We see 4 buttons here on the front: mode, display, current, and slot. Mode is used to change the operating mode, which can be set different in each of the slots. So currently we see they're all showing charge. Display is used to change what values are shown down here. We'll see that in action in a minute. Current is used to adjust the charge or discharge current. And slot is used to change which of the slots we are operating on and manipulating. And it can either be a single slot, or we can choose to make changes to all slots at the same time. So we're going to look at how this operates by inserting this nickel metal hydride battery. Now initially it shows the voltage, and then it'll start to flash the charge current. And I have to start pressing a button here before it stops flashing, because once the charge current locks in for a few seconds and stops flashing, then you can't change it without either taking the battery out and reinserting it, or sort of changing the mode for the slot. So while that's flashing, I can change the charge current. And so I'm going to just leave that on a fairly low charge current of 300 milliamps. Now the other thing I can do is I can change the mode here. So charge charges the cell, discharge discharges the cell, discharge refresh actually goes through 3 charge and discharge cycles in order to refresh the cell. Charge test charges the cell fully first and then it puts it through a discharge cycle to determine the capacity. And then quick test is used to test the battery internal resistance. So I'm going to leave that one in charge mode and 300 milliamps, and that's going to kind of settle in, and it'll stop flashing after a moment. And there it is. That's doing its thing. Now I'm going to put another battery in slot 2. We can see the current there, 300, 700, 1,000, back to 200, 300, 500, 700, 1,000, and it cycles 200 again. Slots 1 and slot 4 can take charge currents up to 2,000 milliamps or a full 2 amps, whereas slots 2 and 3 are limited to 1 amp or 1,000 milliamps. And so we can see those cells. Currently, they're both set to charge. I'm going to take another, in this case, we can mix these. So I'm going to take a lithium ion cell. I'm going to put this lithium ion cell into slot 4. You can see the voltage there, but I'm going to change the mode now. So I'm going to set that to discharge. And just like the charge current, I can set the discharge current. And of course, there's a limit. You can see 1,000 milliamps, 200 milliamps, 300, 500, 700, 1,000. I'm going to just set this at a 500 milliamp discharge current. So that's another thing that you can see here. The cells can all have different cycles or different modes that they're operating in. So all of the channels, all of the slots can operate independently, which is a very nice feature. So it doesn't lock you into always doing the same thing at one time. Now the backlight went out. So now if I press the slot key, you can see I'm looking at this slot. I can change the display from showing me the milliamps in charge. It's showing me the voltage. It's showing me the accumulated milliamp hours during the charge cycle and how long it's been charging for or discharging for, as the case may be, in the cycle. And then back to milliamps, which is in this case is the charge current. But like I say, if we go over to slot 4, the display, we're showing milliamps. We're seeing the current voltage of the cell, the accumulated milliamp hours for the discharge cycle, and how long the discharge cycle has been running, and then back to the charge current. One of the things to note is that we can also operate on all of the slots at once. So if I press the slot button, you can see that's slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, slot 4, and now the next time they're all going to change. And when I start to change the mode, you'll see that the mode is going to line up first on charge, but then I can say discharge, discharge refresh, charge test, quick test, and then back to charge. And when I change the current now, the current lines up as well. So all of them are going to have the same current setting. A special thing about slot 1 and slot 4 is that they can have a charge current that goes up to 2 amps. When I insert a cell here, you can see that's 500, 700, 1,000, 1,500, and there's a 2,000 milliamp charge current. Now that'll only work if I don't have a cell in slots 2 or 3. And let's look at what happens when I put, well, you can see that's dropped down now because the cell is pretty full. But if I put a cell here in slot 2, Now it's going to charge at 500 milliamps. But when I insert this cell now, and try to adjust the charge current 1000 milliamps and back to 200. So because I've got something in slot 2, and same for slot 3, if these slots are populated, then I can only go up to a charge current, a maximum charge current in 1 and 4 of 1000 milliamps. But when these cell slots are empty, I can go to a charge current of 2000 milliamps in slot 1 and slot 4. I have the unit populated now with 4 cells, and let's just go through the display once more, but in a little more detail, and discuss a little more what we're seeing here. The display is showing the actual charge current that is currently in operation for each of the cells up to the maximum limit we've set. So it generally won't go above 500 milliamps. It might go 1 milliamp above, for example, or 2, we can see there. But it's generally going to try to stick to that current that we specified when the cell was inserted. Now if I press display again, we can see the current voltage on each of the cells. Display again, we can see how many milliamp hours have gone into each of these cells. And of course, these are cells that are, you can't really see them probably on the display, but these are rated for 600 milliamp hours. And so these were fairly discharged when I inserted them. We'll see where these end up. And then we can see the different amounts of charge time for the different cells, and this will increment up until the point where the cell is full. And we'll see that once the cell is full, these are really going to show us how much time it took for us in order to charge the cell. And then that cycles back to milliamps. And since these cells are all fairly empty, they're all still operating at that, roughly speaking, 500 milliamp constant current charge level. A few other items to note as we kind of go through these. For the nickel metal hydride and NiCad cells, when the charge cycle is completed and it says full, the charger enters a trickle phase for those slots. That's not the case in the case of lithium-ion cells. In a lithium-ion cell, when the charger detects that it's at the end of the charge cycle, it no longer supplies any current to that channel, because that's a bad idea for lithium-ion cells to continue to be charged once they're fully charged. One of the interesting things about that trickle charge capability is that in the discharge mode, when the cell is fully discharged, for nickel metal hydride and NiCad cells, the charger will go into a trickle mode on those discharged cells to keep them from discharging further, because that could be a bad thing. It could prevent proper charging in the future. So now you can see that the charge cycle has ended. These are all showing as full. And if we change the display, we'll see the current voltage. Oops. Then we'll see the milliamp hours that were added into the batteries. It keeps, as you can see, going back to full. So that's the current charge current, current voltage, the milliamp hours that were added, and then the runtime that it took to charge each of the cells. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the discharge cycle. I've got some cells here. These were all charged. And so I'm just going to stick them in here one at a time. You can kind of see the voltage is just appearing there. And they're all flashing. Now I'm going to change this mode. So discharge. Now I can change the discharge current. 500, 700, 200. So you can see here I can cycle through. The highest discharge current that I can operate with these 4 cells is 700 across all 4 channels. And so I'm going to just run these at a 500 milliamp discharge current, and we'll let that settle in. Okay, and so now they're discharging. So I'm going to let that run for a while. It's been about 40 minutes since I started this discharge cycle. Slot 1 started a little bit late. That's why it's a little bit low. If we press the display button, we can see the runtime here. So about 40 minutes, like I was saying. Press again, you can see that the discharge current is the 500 milliamps that we set. And then we can see the current voltage of each of the cells around 1.21, 1.22 volts. Display again takes us back to the milliamp hour display. It's about 15 minutes later. Some of the charge energy is in the 600 milliamp range. This one has kind of seems different from all the others at 596. The others are still, 630-ish. If we press the display button, we can see the time that these have run. So these are all ticking along, but this one is now 5 minutes behind, which suggests that the discharge cycle here is stopped. If we look at the current, we can actually see now that 3 of these channels have stopped discharging. Right, there's 0 milliamps on the discharge level, and this one is drifting down quite well as well. And back here we can see the voltage. The voltage is kind of varying, a little bit. Usually, if we watch this one, typical discharge voltage is 0.8 volts. And then, of course, after the discharge cycle stops, the voltage will drift back up, which is a normal thing. And then we can see back here to the milliamp hours. So what we're noticing is that this one looks like it's still discharging. We can see that this one discharged for an hour and 12 minutes. These two discharged for an hour and 17 minutes. And this one so far for an hour and 19 minutes. Now when we look at the discharge currents, that's at 0 as well. And now when we look at the voltage, because it's no longer discharging under any load, we can see that the voltage has come up to 1.19 volts. And so now that they've all finished, the only way we can tell that they've finished, by the way, is to look at the discharge current, the active discharge current. So there's not an analog of full. They don't say empty or anything like that. So we can see that when the discharge current is all 0 here, the voltage, you can see that's all kind of stabilizing around 1.2 volts. But now we know that this is the total amount of energy that we were able to capture from each of these cells over that discharge period. So generally around 630 milliamp hours, and this particular cell up here topped out around 600 milliamp hours. Now we're going to look at the refresh mode. So I'm just going to get all the slots activated here. Discharge, it's called discharge refresh. And we're going to bump the current up here to try to make this go a little faster. What this is going to do in discharge refresh is it's going to cycle through multiple times. So it's going to discharge the battery, and these have just been discharged, so the discharge phase shouldn't take very long. Then it's going to charge the battery, and then it's going to do that 2 more times for a total of 3 times. So it's going to do discharge, charge, discharge, charge, and then discharge, charge in order to kind of fully charge the battery. But it will go through it 3 times. And the idea there is that on these nickel metal hydride NiCad batteries, going through a cycle like this can sometimes, by going through that full cycle, it can expand the capacity or improve the capacity of the battery and kind of eliminate any capacity memory that the battery might have developed. Okay, so we can see that this one has jumped up to 700 milliamps, and so has this one. What's interesting is that the time appears to have reset. You can see that now, instead of saying discharge refresh, this channel is saying charge refresh, and this one is also saying charge refresh. So that tells us that it's in the charge phase of the cycle as opposed to the discharge phase of the cycle. Okay, so this channel has flipped over. We can see the higher charge current at 700 milliamps, and it no longer says discharge, it says charge. So we can tell that that's in the charge phase there. And this one will probably flip over in a second too. We can see the current is dropping substantially now. Okay, now we can see that that's changed over to charge mode. The voltage is still showing 0.94, but now you can see on the next cycle of the values, it's now up to 1.25 volts. So that's now the charge voltage as opposed to the discharge voltage. So all of the slots are now charging. The different amounts of time that these channels have been in the cycle. So some of these channels have been in the charge cycle for 5 minutes. This one just entered the charge cycle and it's been in that mode for 1 minute. So this is not the total accumulated time for the 3 passes, if you will. This is the amount of time of the current cycle in the process. Okay, so we're about 30 minutes in, and we're in this charging mode for the battery cell refresh. If we cycle through the display, we see initially these are all at about 700 milliamps, so that's the charge current. Voltage is rising across the board. These milliamp hour measurements are from the previous discharge cycle, so it's not showing us how many milliamp hours have been added during this charge phase. It is showing us how long the charge phase has lasted. And notice here that it says charge on this side, right? As we go through, this is saying charge, that's saying charge, but the discharge appears when it's showing us the current from the discharge cycle. We're about an hour in. We can see that the charge cycles on slots 1, 3, and 4 are coming to an end by the reduced current levels. Unfortunately, I nudged slot 2 somewhere along the process, and so that disrupted the cycle and it started over. Let's look at what's going on in these slots. So we can see the voltages here. They're coming up to the full charge voltage. This one in slot 2 is dropping as expected because it's actually discharging. And we can see it's been in this discharge mode for about 30 minutes. And the other cells have been in the charge mode for a little over an hour. Oh, you can see this one just flipped back over, so it's now discharging. We can see now this slot is discharging. This one is still charging. This one's still charging. And this one's discharging. So all of these slots are in different phases of the process. And of course, one of the things to note, if you recall the way that the charge mode works, the charge mode normally stops when it's full, but in this case you can see that the charge took it to being full and then immediately flipped into discharge mode. And if we now look at what's going on in the display, we can see that that zeroed the current, sorry, not the current, the capacity measurement, and now it's beginning to accumulate that capacity in milliamp hours again. So the milliamp hour capacity measurement only accumulates values during the discharge phase. It doesn't change during the charge phase. We're now about 2 hours into the process, and things are looking a little different now. We can see that this slot is in discharge mode, as is slot 3 in discharge mode. Slot 2, which has kind of become the odd one out, is in charge mode. But now we can see slot 4 has also moved over to charge mode. And if we cycle the display over, we see the voltages. We see the discharge current here. So slot 4 ran through a charge cycle, through a discharge cycle. And so this is the capacity that was discharged by the end of that cycle. And if we flip over the display, we can see that the charge cycle that it's in now has only been running for about 2 minutes. Another 30 minutes has gone by. And now we can see how long each particular cycle is. So what you can't tell is you can't tell how long a particular cycle lasted. So you don't know if the charge cycle or discharge cycle was 40, 50, 60 minutes, whatever the case might be. You only see how long the current phase of the whole process is. The next 30 minutes has gone by, and we see here I've got these showing the time, and so this cycle has lasted 1 hour and 4 minutes, 53 minutes, 1 hour and 5 minutes. This one has just switched over, and it's now, I believe, in the discharge phase. Let's just cycle through the display. So this one is discharging at sort of close to 700 milliamps. The next 30-minute phase has gone by, and we see discharge, charge, discharge, discharge. And if we press the display, there are the voltages. 30 minutes later, we can see that all 3 channels are now in charge mode. You can see the charge voltages. And we can see, since all of them are in charge mode, we can see what the capacity was in the last discharge cycle for all of these cells. Another 30 minutes have passed. We can see charging here, charging here, charging here. This one is probably coming close to the end of this particular charge cycle. And then this slot is discharging. Well, a little while later, and now we can see that the cycles have ended for some of these cells. So this one is charged and it's full. These 2 are charged and it's full. This one, which I had some issues with because I touched it at the beginning, is working its way, I think, towards, well, actually it's discharging right now, I guess. If we go through the display, yeah, so this one is discharging. Those others are full, and of course, it wants to go back to full. We can see that there's a trickle charge current there. We can see what the last discharge capacity was. I really wish it would stay without moving. So we can see what the capacity has been on them. And then that's how long the last cycle took. And so we can see that when it finishes the 3 cycles and finishes charging, it puts the battery over to full. And so there you have it. That is how the discharge refresh mode works. We're going to have a look at the charge test mode now. And I'm just going to load these cells in. And I have to be a little bit quick because once the charge current locks in, it doesn't want to change. Okay. Okay, so all of those are there. I'm going to set the current to 700 milliamps. And the first thing that happens in the charge test cycle is that the cells are fully topped up so that they are at their full capacity. So this is going to go through a charge phase. Then after the charge phase finishes for these, it's going to go through a discharge phase. And during that discharge phase, it's going to measure the capacity of the cells. And then after that discharge phase, it's going to charge the cells to full again, so that at the end of this cycle, we have we know the capacity of the cells and we have fully charged cells. On the display here, whoops, we see the voltages. These cells are already mostly fully charged. And during this particular charge cycle, it doesn't show the amount of energy that's been added into the cells. In fact, this display only updates at the end of the discharge phase. So we get no reading here at all until the discharge phase finishes, and then the amount of time that these have been in operation. Now, since these cells are mostly full, it hasn't taken very long for the charge currents to start dropping down from 700 milliamps. Once the charger determines that each of or a particular slot is fully charged, then it's going to go from charge mode into discharge mode at the same 700 milliamps. Let's see if we can capture a point where it does do that switch from the charge mode to the discharge mode. We can see now that this channel has moved over from the charge phase to the discharge phase. These are still charging up to capacity. Now if we look at the display here, oh, now this channel has switched over as well. We can see that there's no accumulation of capacity, and we can see that it was about 15 minutes, because these cells were mostly charged when we started. It was about 15 minutes that that phase ran, and of course these cells are still in the charge mode. We can now see, after about an hour, which is how long it takes for these cells to charge, more or less, this slot has completed the discharge cycle and it's now in the charge phase, so it's charging up. These three slots are still in the discharge phase. Now if we cycle through the display, we see the voltages, not too interesting there. But now we see for the cell that fully discharged, the capacity is displayed here in milliamp hours. So we have the capacity for that cell, but these other cells which are still in the discharge cycle are not showing any values. These only start to show values at the point where the discharge cycle is fully complete. And we can see here that the discharge phase on these cells has been running for about 56 minutes, about what I expected, and this particular slot has been charging for 2 minutes. We can see now that all of the slots are in the charge phase. You can see the voltages there. This is the capacity of each of the cells from the discharge phase that recently completed. And we can see how long each of these cells has been in the current charge phase. Okay, we just saw this slot transition from the charge state to the full state, and we see these other slots, their charge current has dropped from 700 milliamps. Now let's look at the rest of the display elements. So we can see the voltages here. This one's at 1.5 volts, and the idiosyncrasy of this unit is that it keeps returning to full and it doesn't stay on the display. Now this is the capacity from the last discharge cycle, and you'll see that in this mode it'll flip back and forth between showing full and the capacity from the last discharge cycle, and of course it shows discharge up here. If we press display again, we can see the amount of time from the last cycle. Once again, this one just keeps returning to full fairly quickly. And then the current charge current on this one. This one is in float mode or trickle mode, and so it's trickle charging this cell. If we come around again, you'll see, so it's 32 milliamps, but it's going to say full. So the only one that'll oscillate between is the capacity. So it'll oscillate between full and the capacity. And that's the operation of the charge test mode. Now let's just have a look at how the quick test mode works. So when I take this cell and insert it here, you can see it starts to detect, and I'm going to change the mode to quick test, and it's going to flash for a while until the mode locks in. It's still not really in this mode. Now it's doing the test, and we can see 185, that's milliohms. That is the internal resistance for the cell. One thing to be aware of, the quick test mode will also operate on non-rechargeable cells. So this is a non-rechargeable cell, and I can put it into the slot here in order to test the battery internal resistance. And so we can see that the internal resistance on that AAA cell is 286 milliohms. So that's one of the few functions that the charger can perform on non-rechargeable cells. Otherwise, it's a bad idea to put non-rechargeable cells into the charger. This is a really useful multi-chemistry battery charger. It supports NiCad, nickel metal hydride, and lithium-ion cells. The charge current and the discharge current can be adjusted independently, and all of the slots can operate independently as well. It also supports measurement of internal resistance for any of the cells, including non-rechargeable cells. The unit does have a variety of annoyances. The full cell display tends to interfere with being able to review some of the other values. The cutoff voltage for these channels is fixed and can't be adjusted. The lock-in time when inserting cells and adjusting the current can be a little too quick, especially when inserting multiple cells and trying to get everything seated properly. In the refresh mode, which goes through the charge-discharge cycles 3 times, there's no indicator to tell you which of the 3 phases or cycles it's in. The energy shown in charge mode doesn't correspond to the energy shown in discharge mode, and is probably a result of the measurement of the total energy going in as opposed to the energy actually going into the cell. In charge test mode, the capacity is not shown until the full cycle completes, as opposed to the regular discharge mode, where the energy accumulates as the discharge cycle operates. All of that said, these annoyances are just that. They're annoyances, and they don't detract from the excellent functionality of the unit. If you found this video to be helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and until next time.